Reverend Inoue of the Wesley United Methodist Church. Please welcome Reverend Inoue.
Good evening, everyone. Before I do the opening prayer, I did want to share that I recently came back from a 2-week vacation in Japan, and while I was sitting in my hotel room watching the news, I suddenly took notice of Fred Korematsu's picture shown on the TV segment as the Japanese newscasters were talking about his advocacy for social justice regarding the denial of the civil liberties of Japanese Americans during World War II and the unjust incarceration of Japanese Americans into the camps. And I believe that was January 30th, Fred Korematsu Day. So it was really indeed a wonderful surprise that he was being remembered across the sea. And though I truly have a poor command of the Japanese language, it was not hard to understand that they were remembering not only Fred Korematsu, but also the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. So for me, it was a good reminder of why we gather here every year, to remember all persons, every family that endured through the internment in the camps, every brave serviceman and woman who went into the military to prove their loyalty, every individual that challenged our government, and so much more. So we want to ensure that these denials of civil liberties and justice never happen again to any other group in this country. That said, let us pray. Merciful God, divine truth affirmed by many faith traditions whose power and presence is love and compassion. As we look around this room and note the diversity of our gathering, we are so thankful and blessed that we are brought together in unity of spirit, with common concerns and shared hope for the future. We ask that you bless our time this night as we gather for this 38th annual San Jose Japantown Day of Remembrance. And as we remember the unjust incarceration of more than 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II, remind us that racism and injustice directed at one people is an affront to us all. Keep us ever mindful of the story of Japanese Americans and the importance and value this people's story has for all Americans. Enable us to have the courage to be advocates and voices for our sisters and brothers in our nation and world who find themselves under similar fears and conditions where they are unfairly regarded with suspect, targeted for hatred, discrimination, and prejudice. Please be present in each of our guest speakers and presenters of God. Enable their voices and their words to be strong, illuminating and inspiring us all as we give you thanks for their time and presence with us this night. And bless the continuing work of the Nihon Machi Outreach Committee and the good that they are doing for our community and the larger community and world. All this we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. This 38th annual San Jose Day of Remembrance event commemorates both the 76th anniversary of the signing of the Executive Order 9066 and the 30th anniversary of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. Thousands of people are gathering together throughout the nation, not only to remember the Japanese American community's civil liberties tragedy, but also to reflect on the difficulties facing all of our communities today. Executive Order 9066 was signed by President Franklin Roosevelt on February 19, 1942, during World War II. It resulted in the forced removal and incarceration of over 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry into American concentration camps, 2/3 of whom were American citizens. This year also marks the 30th anniversary of the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which was a federal act that granted redress and a formal presidential apology to every surviving U.S. citizen or legal resident immigrant of Japanese ancestry incarcerated during World War II. of winning redress was particularly significant because the movement for redress started during the rise of the civil rights movement and growing activism within the Japanese American community in the 60s and 70s. Today, in that spirit, and on this 30th anniversary, we encourage everyone to become involved and exercise their voice. The Nihonmachi Outreach Committee, or NOC, is the local group that organizes the Day of Remembrance program. And they launched the redress movement during a time when many people, including people within the Japanese American community, were not very supportive of their efforts. But the result was the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which we celebrate tonight. The objective of NOC is to preserve our history and fight for communities who are vulnerable, so that the history does not repeat itself. NOC has accomplished a lot this past year. In January, NOC, alongside other progressive organizations, allies, and neighbors, marched with the Women's March. In February, last year's Day of Remembrance broke records, and more than 700 people attended. Many of you are here again today, and we're so glad to see you. In March, NOC organized a Japanese American and American Muslim solidarity march from Japantown to San Jose City Hall, and attracted more than 100 people. In May, we also marched in contingent with CARE at the annual May Day event. Then in June, NOC joined with almost 1,000 other activists, showing their solidarity with American Muslims at the Unity Vigil. And in September, NOC attended the 9/11 Memorial Multi-Faith Peace Picnic, organized by the American Muslim Voice Foundation. This year's Day of Remembrance event carries the theme, Speak Out for Justice. During these difficult times, people who have been working tirelessly for social justice have been joined by many brave people who may have been silent in the past and are now motivated to stand up and have their voices heard. We have been seeing a multifaceted social movement, and we are hearing the large number of voices speaking out against the current political climate of fear, against police brutality, against the unequal treatment and harassment of women. We are hearing from vulnerable populations, like the DACA Dreamers. We are seeing people stand up at airports and say, no travel ban, no wall, sanctuary for all. We are seeing people kneel at sports events and say Black Lives Matter. We are saying no to racism, homophobia, transphobia, and Islamophobia. From the Fight to 15 to the Me Too movement, to people declaring that they're undocumented and unafraid, people are mobilizing and rising up from within their own communities to effect change. We are here because we remember what happened to Japanese Americans during the hysteria of war, and we cannot allow this to happen again to any other group. If they come for you, we will speak out for justice and fight back. Tonight we come together to renew our commitment to equality and justice for all people. I would like to introduce Becky Shibayama, our a keynote speaker, who will talk about her own experience with the Campaign for Justice and the Japanese Peruvian Oral History Project. Please welcome Becky Shibayama.
On behalf of the Nihonmachi Outreach Committee and the Campaign for Justice, I would like to thank you all for attending this evening's 38th Annual San Jose Day of Remembrance. The Day of Remembrance was first established during our Japanese American community's pursuit for truth and justice, for the right to redress and government accountability. On this day, we are reminded that the struggle continues for Latin Americans of Japanese descent. Internees are still fighting to hold the U.S. government accountable for the war crimes and crimes against humanity committed against them over 70 years ago. If you would please direct your attention to the screen, we will show a short clip from the documentary Hidden Internment, the Archie Leona story. The documentary tells the story of my father and over 2,200 Japanese Latin Americans who were forcibly brought to the U.S. under a covert government program.
Archie Leona was just 13 years old and living comfortably in Peru when he was forced out of the only home he had ever known. During World War II, the United States government, in collaboration with several Latin American countries, orchestrated the forced removal and internment of over 2,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, which included both citizens of 13 Latin American countries as well as Japanese immigrants. Like young Archie Leona, the vast majority were Japanese Peruvians. Shortly after the Japanese military attack on Pearl Harbor, community leaders were scapegoated and rounded up for detention throughout the Americas. In Peru, a blacklist had been generated. While not based on any real or credible evidence of Japanese subversive activity, the blacklist targeted businessmen, community leaders, and educators. In collaboration with Peruvian officials, the U.S. used the blacklist as the basis for rounding up hostages. These hostages were then to be traded for Americans held by Japan. Most of the Japanese Latin Americans were interned in a Department of Justice camp at Crystal City, Texas. A 10-foot fence, guard towers, and floodlights surrounded this camp. The camp also held persons of Italian and German ancestry from the United States and Latin America, as well as Japanese Americans. But for Art and the other internees, their long ordeal did not end with the close of World War II. The remaining Japanese Latin Americans were told that they were illegal aliens and would be deported. And because the Latin American governments initially refused to allow these internees to return, over 1,000 were thus deported to war-devastated Japan.
The legislation that I am about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 survivors, surviving Japanese Americans, of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.
However, Art was denied justice. Under this law, Japanese Latin Americans were deemed ineligible for redress as they were not U.S. citizens or residents at the time of internment. In an effort to call attention to their hidden history and to support efforts for redress, the Campaign for Justice was formed.
The Campaign for Justice started in 1996, and it was founded by individuals and organizations who wanted to seek redress for Japanese Latin Americans.
In response to public pressure, the Department of Justice offered a settlement of only $5,000 each, just 1/4 of the $20,000 redress provided to the Japanese Americans.
I wanted to get the equal justice. I wanted to regain the dignity for my parents.
While supporting the decision of those who accepted the settlement, Archie Leona, along with several others, chose to opt out of the settlement. He then filed his own lawsuit, preferring to fight for both redress and a full disclosure of the violations committed by the United States during World War II. Despite his efforts, Art was once again denied justice. His case was dismissed in the final months of 2002.
You know, it's not like we wanted to come here. We didn't want to come here. We were forced to come here. We were brought here by the government. So how can that be legal?
Until the crime is over, meaning it has been fully acknowledged and fully compensated, it is ongoing.
My family and I are very proud of my father for his pursuit for justice and for his courage to hold the U.S. government accountable for its wrongdoing. Despite my father's and others' efforts to educate the American public, the Japanese-Peruvian internment is still widely unknown. We need the U.S. government to apologize and acknowledge what it did. We need educational funds, and we need full disclosure. So what happened to the Japanese Peruvians will not happen to my family, to any other family, or to any other group again. This short clip cannot convey the scope of suffering that is endured. How can it possibly? They lost their homes, businesses, and financial security, their community and their country, their freedom and dignity and bright promise for the future. And in the case of my father, he even lost his grandparents when they were used in hostage exchanges. And he never saw the grandparents who he loved so dearly again. But do not think this cannot happen again. When my father is asked why he, at the age of 87, continues to fight for redress, he answers, so these kinds of things won't happen to any other people again. I wanted to introduce my parents. Unfortunately, my father's been feeling under the weather today, so he wasn't able to make it. But my mother, Betty Shibayama, is here, and I'd like to introduce her because she has also been speaking out for justice for many years. Unable to secure justice in the U.S. courts, the pursuit for the Japanese Latin Americans continues with an international body, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. In March 2017, for the first time, my father was given the opportunity to testify in a public hearing about his incarceration and the impact it had on our family. The commissioners were sympathetic, stating, "We cannot accept such violations of rights, which are part of the declaration by which we can hold the United States accountable. And we assure you that the Commission will consider very seriously what we can and cannot do." The IACHR has yet to issue its ruling, but we are hopeful for a favorable one. The Campaign for Justice invites you to take action now, before it's too late. Please sign and share our petition to the IACHR, letting them know we want a favorable ruling as soon as possible. You can sign online via change.org and search for IACHR. Paper petitions are also available at our Campaign for Justice table in the back, so please sign. Please stop by the table and sign. Invite Campaign for Justice to speak at your school, place of worship, or community group. Educational presentations about the Japanese Latin American history are a top priority for us. Help us to expand our strategic approaches to effectuate long-standing change. Your strategic ideas are welcome in helping us to move forward with our mission. Your skills, energy, and financial support can help Campaign for Justice to advance our educational and redress efforts and are very much appreciated. Numerous volunteer opportunities are available. For additional information, please visit our new website at jlacampaignforjustice.org each day of remembrance, we have all reaffirmed our commitment to never again, to take a stand and speak out for justice. Given the current political climate, it is alarming where we find ourselves as a nation. Parallels with the past are increasing and imposing. Through executive orders, policies, and actions, our government is violating our civil and human rights and attacking our families and our communities. Let us follow the example of those who spoke out for justice on our behalf. Resist xenophobia, racism, fear, and hate. Organize for justice, equality, and peace. By uniting and lifting our voices in support of one another, we can achieve a world where civil liberties and human rights are promoted and protected. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. Next, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Attar Siddiqui. Currently, Attar is on the Board of Directors of the South Bay Islamic Association, on the Steering Committee of the Human Development Foundation, and on the Advisory Board of the Rahima Foundation, a nonprofit charity group that feeds local families in need. Please welcome Attar Siddiqui.
Dear friends, konbanwa. Good evening. 76 years ago tomorrow, 120,000 Japanese Americans were forced into internment camps. A commission reviewing this horribly unjust action stated that, among other things, it was rooted in, quote, racial prejudice and a failure of political leadership, unquote. It is ironic, sad, and depressing that many of those currently living in the United States would say that racial prejudice and a failure of political leadership is alive and well today. As a lifelong resident of the Bay Area and a proud American Muslim, I have seen firsthand this country grow and flourish by opening its doors to those from other lands, providing opportunities for immigrants to obtain an education and make a living, and leveraging the skills and abilities of these individuals to make this country the best place on earth. And one of the characteristics that makes this nation great is the right and ability for everyone to not only celebrate our freedoms and opportunities, but to stand up and oppose stances when our so-called leaders lose their way and allow the bigotry and hate espoused by their constituents to dictate their policies. We've seen it with the current administration's plans to build a wall between the U.S. and Mexico, to pay less heed to crimes perpetrated against people of color, and to pass legislation preventing individuals from 7 Muslim-majority countries to come to America, a ban which is very much in effect today. We're also seeing it through the embarrassingly muted responses from our nation's leaders who need to be held accountable for their inaction regarding the ease with which just about anyone in the U.S. can obtain a firearm and perpetrate acts of terror. As a result, the list of senseless slaughters goes on in Parkland, Florida, Sandy Hook, Columbine, and numerous other locations where horrifying mass killings could be severely decreased, if not eliminated, if we had held our public officials accountable and demanded that they choose between the wants of special interest groups and the safety of our children. All these issues share a commonality, that people of conscience will not allow injustice to continue unabated. At some point, the rising tide of principled voices are led by their moral compass to say, enough is enough. We've seen this happen more and more recently through movements such as Black Lives Matter, Time's Up, and No Muslim Ban Ever. After an earlier ban was temporarily rescinded, it was genuinely heartwarming and inspiring for me to see individuals of all backgrounds, faiths, and ethnicities at airports throughout America holding signs stating, "Refugees are welcome in the USA," and "I am home and so are you." For this country didn't become the land of opportunity and freedom by allowing those seeking to divide us to have their way. No, this country earned that status because it featured individuals who overcame numerous challenges and obstacles to find a way to defeat oppression, discrimination, and hatred. It's also important to recognize that this wasn't affected and justice wasn't obtained overnight. Rather, it was a time-consuming activity that required persistence, dedication, and courage. It also mandated that those fighting oppression didn't simply wait for leaders to right their wrongs, but rather these individuals risked their lives by being unwilling to accept the status quo. People like Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat on that bus in Montgomery, Alabama. People like Cesar Chavez, who worked tirelessly to improve the working conditions for farm workers. And brave Japanese Americans like Fred Korematsu, Gordon Hirabayashi, and Mini Yasui, who resisted and fought against the legality of detention all the way to the Supreme Court. And that same Japanese American community, which has since thrived and earned its status as a proud and vibrant part of the American fabric, was the first community to join hands with the Muslim American community and in effect proclaim, "We know what it's like to have an entire category of people unfairly and unjustly stereotyped. And not only are we going to do everything in our power to ensure that it never again happens to us, but we're going to stand alongside your community to ensure it doesn't happen to you." And for that principled and most noble stance, the Muslim community thanks you for your very dear friendship, is grateful to you for allowing us to be a part of this day of remembrance, and will always be there for you in your times of need, as you have demonstrated time and time again that you are here for us. Together, along with all of you in this room, we must continue to fight oppression in all its forms, stand up for what is right, irrespective of whether or not the issue affects us personally, and always remember to speak out for justice. Thank you very much, and may God bless you.
Our remembrance. Please welcome a highly decorated American veteran, Lawson Sakai. Lawson fought for freedom at a time when his own nation took away his personal freedom and that of so many of his friends and family. Lawson enlisted in the segregated 442nd Regimental Combat Team, where he received a Purple Heart, a Combat Infantryman Badge, and a Bronze Star Medal, which is given for heroic achievements and valor. He is currently the president of the Friends and Family of Nisei Veterans. Please welcome Lawson Sakai.
Thank you. Oh, it's so great to see so many people here. We haven't been here before because we always go to Salinas. Their Day of Remembrance is at the actual location of a temporary assembly center, right at the Salinas Fairgrounds. Usually it's around the 18th or 19th, but this year it's going to be next Sunday. So if you folks would like to come to another Day of Remembrance, you can come to Salinas Fairgrounds at about 1 p.m., Sunday the 25th. The Monterey Peninsula folks are the hosts. They will be bringing the actual document signed by renowned historians of the Monterey Peninsula welcoming the Japanese back to Monterey Peninsula. And incidentally, all these cities up and down the coast had resolutions that said, we don't want any Japs back here ever. A lot of those resolutions are still on the books. Somebody has to get them erased. A very dangerous situation that can be brought up again. Let me take you back to December 7th, 1941. I see a few faces here that probably were around then. That Sunday morning, I was doing my homework. I was an 18-year-old student at Compton Junior College in Southern California. The announcer broke in and said, Pearl Harbor had been attacked. Well, I knew then it would be a very traumatic experience for my parents who were immigrants from Japan. I know they had spoken about the tension between the governments of Japan and the United States for many, many months. My parents were working in the field. When they came in from lunch, 18-year-old kid, I said, your country attacked my country. They were upset. And of course, it was inexcusable what I said to them. But that's how I felt. The next day, December 8th, 3 of my college classmates and I, Ed Hardage, Ray Kentner, Jimmy Keys, all Caucasians, we decided we'd go to Long Beach Naval Station and enlist in the Navy. So we go down there, and Roy, Jimmy, they are welcomed into the Navy. I step up, Sakai, you're Japanese. We don't want Japs in the Navy. That was my first taste of discrimination in this country. My classmate said, if the Navy doesn't want you, the hell with them. We're not going in either. So we all left and went back to school. After a few weeks, and the reason we are here, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942. That put over 120,000 of the Japanese people living on the West Coast into Americans' concentration camps. Suddenly, we all became prisoners of war in our own country, the United States. It was from this atmosphere in 1943 when the military asked for volunteers to form one special regiment in the Army to fight in the European War. It was an unpopular decision by many people. However, a number of the Nisei boys volunteered, a lot of them from the concentration camps, from their prisons, volunteered to go and fight for the United States. They were a major part of the Great Generation. Over 800 young Nisei boys gave their lives in that war. And I want to remind all of you younger people, please do not forget what the Nisei did for your generation. A huge sacrifice. But they did it because they wanted you to have the life that you enjoy today. And of course, it was to fight for their country, the greatest nation on this earth. God bless America.
Ceremony will begin with a roll call of the camps. The camp names and populations will be called out by Sharon Ueda of the San Jose JCL and Reiko Nakayama of NOC. The ceremony will be accompanied by the music of San Jose Taiko. I would like to ask those of you in the audience who were incarcerated because of Executive Order 9066 or its counterpart in Canada and Latin America to please stand or raise your hand. Thank you. Tonight we also have the privilege of the Takichi family, represented by Roy, Doug, and Jillian, as well as Lawson Sakai, in the candlelighting ceremony. They will light the candles as the name of each camp and number of internees are called, as well as a candle for the World War II veterans.
First camp is Manzanar, California, 10,046 incarcerated.
Tule Lake, California, 18,789.
Poston, Arizona, 17,814.
Gila River, Arizona, 13,348.
Hart Mountain, Wyoming, 10,767.
Hamachi, Colorado, 7 8,318.
Jerome, Arkansas, 8,497.
Roar, Arkansas, 8,475.
Topaz, Utah, 8,130.
Minidoka, Idaho, 9,397.
Crystal City, Texas, and other Department of Justice camps unknown, and World War II veterans.
Everybody please pass out the candles, and we can turn down the lights. We will observe a moment of silence in memory and honor of those interned and those who served in World War II.
Aloha and Dalmor, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you from Aswat Ensemble. Good evening. My name is Taiko Imperial. Whoa, hello. About to have to use my stage voice. My name is Franco Imperial. I'm Artistic Director for San Jose Taiko. How's everyone doing tonight? It means so much for us to come together in unity for something that we feel so strongly about here in our Japantown community and obviously across the nation. The next piece we're going to perform is called Day of Remembrance. It's a piece that I wrote in 2007. In 2004, at this Day of Remembrance here, Maha El-Junaidi from the Islamic Networks group, she came up here and she spoke, and it was the first time I had heard someone from the Muslim American community say that it was the Japanese American community that was the first to come to their aid in the events post 9/11. And I was really inspired by that. And it is unfortunate that we have to draw those connections again today. So in 2007, I wrote this song only for Taiko. In 2015, I was at a Council for American Islamic Relations fundraiser where San Jose Taiko was asked to perform. And it was really interesting because it was there in the Arab American, Muslim American community, this banquet, where they recognized the same thing. It was an echo of what happens here. And I found that very striking. It was the first time I had been to a CARE event, and I had felt sort of like an outsider who came just to play Taiko. Weiss and I actually took a break from playing Taiko that night, and we decided to sit at a table and meet some folks. And it was there I met someone who eventually introduced me to Nabila Mango, who is the co-founder of Aswat Ensemble. Nabila, if you could please stand up. We have been now partners in crime for the last few years, and this collaborative project, what turned into a project, but is now, we're like family now, and it's a beautiful thing. It really speaks to how as artists, we tell stories. And the story of this song is how communities come together to stand up for each other and to celebrate each other. So we hope you enjoy Day of Remembrance.